Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, I'm talking with Paul Hashman about living on a boat. Paul has been living on a boat since the beginning of 2025, and he's learned a lot about that, and it'll be very interesting to find out more. Welcome to Forest Chat, Paul.
Good afternoon, Paul. Thank you for the opportunity to come on the show. This is cool.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show, Paul. Paul, living on a boat sounds really simple, but what's involved?
Well, I call it a house on the water. You know, we see a lot of people now who are not so much retired, but they don't want to stay fixed. You know, they're quite happy being mobile. This is just another opportunity to be living, you know, in a full house environment, but we're portable, we're mobile. We don't travel the bitumen highways, we travel our own highways, you know, the wet highways. So what's involved? Well, like anything, you know, boats require, you know, licenses, servicing, maintenance, etc., but so does your house. So, you know, we're looking at a compact version of your house, but you can pack it up and move it along.
It's a little different to packing up a caravan, for example. It's a different arrangement, isn't it?
Very much so. You know, you can pack up your caravan and, you know, stop anywhere you like. Packing up a boat, there's a lot more involved. You know, can it fit inside? Because water, you know, like anything, water gets into everything. Caravan, you can keep the water out, but a boat, you can't keep the water out. So everything's got to be in its place, have its place, and be, you know, fixed in its place before you can actually go anywhere. And as for where you park your boat, you can't simply stop on the side of the road, as with most, you know, grey nomads, and they do a great job of it. We've got to find specific places to actually park and stop. And that's all weather dependent and where you can find places.
Right, so we're in the Bunbury area at the moment, and Bunbury has a port, and there's also facilities down at Busselton and around the coast to Augusta and heading north as well. Can't forget them. There is a whole series of places that you could actually go and stay. Is that right?
Correct. Well, I'm currently parked at the Bunbury Marina, so there's facilities there. There's pens available, so I can tie up my boat. I can get on and off quite easily. I've got facilities there to use and be civilised, and there's quite a few along the coast. There's Busselton has the Port Geo Marina. There's marinas further around the coast down in Augusta, and if you get up to Perth, you know, there's Rockingham, there's Mandurah first, then Rockingham and Perth. And there's quite a few marinas along the coast, basically. They're one of the safest places to park because all the facilities are there. You can tie your boat up and it's safe and secure. There are other places you can park. There's the Yacht Club in Bunbury here as well. So they've got moorings, so no jetty access. So you've got to have the facility to get from your boat back to shore and find some facilities to use there as needed. But like anything, you still need to get food, groceries, the usual stuff, but you've got that smaller space to pack it all into. So there's a little bit of preparation required, but all in all, it's not that much different to being a grey nomad and travelling the countryside in your caravan or your camper van or even, you know, a truck or however you choose to do it.
Yeah, there's all different setups that you can use. You see people heading around in buses, you see people with towing caravans, You know, people go out with tents, you can't always see them, but, you know, so there's all different ways of them doing it. What are the variations that you generally see in what's available to you, like if you're going to look at going that way?
Really, the only variations are size. You know, a bigger boat's going to have more cabin space, more storage space, etc. The smaller ones, you've just got to be very fussy in what you actually keep on board. There's currently it's an ex-ferry and it's parked on a mooring at the Bunbury Marina, and it's huge. It's actually quite big. He's very well set up, and he goes back and forth from his boat in a little dinghy, comes back to the jetty. He's got access to all the facilities, etc. But yeah, the main variations are really size. You know, how big is your boat or how small is your boat?
Right, and then that probably determines what you can access as far as places to actually moor.
Correct. Also, sorry, I should add one more variation. There are riverboats, but there's only one problem with those. They are restricted to a river. You can't take them out in open water because they won't survive. But in all, like I say, size is your biggest variation there. But certainly size can be an indication of where you can and cannot park. And we're in the harbour here. There's there's the channel for the big freighters to come in and out. Very, very important you don't park in a channel. Anywhere else is fair game. As long as you're not obstructing a channel or a commercial boats, you're pretty much anywhere you want to park.
So you could have your anchor and be like off the surf beach, or you could be...
You can, yep. I mean, as we discussed earlier, was having a pen at the marina. There is a cost involved, but that comes with those additional facilities like toilet, showers, etc., and having that same pen to park in every single day. So you've got that. It's like having your own parking space.
Gives you an address almost.
Pretty much, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And of course, it's safe and secure. So, like we lock the front door on our house, we lock the door on the caravan, we lock the security door at the beginning of the jetty, and, we're quite safe parked in there.
It's swimming access after that.
Correct. Yep. If you want to get out there, you got to swim. Absolutely. Actually, one thing I often joke about it, but it's dead serious. I have my own backyard swimming pool. So come summertime, coming back from work every day, I've got my backyard swimming pool.
That's it. Low maintenance as well.
Low maintenance. Very low maintenance. Yep. I just jump in and swim. With that said, dolphins. There's a lot of dolphins in Kambana Bay here in Bunbury. And there's a lot of dolphins coming to the marina as well. So there's a lot of life. There's all sorts of wildlife, fish, crabs, all, easily accessible. But the dolphins come in on a daily basis. That's very cool.
Thinking about living on a boat, then you mentioned about you still go to the shops and that sort of thing. But what about stuff like when we drove across the country, we'd sold up and we bought a car and we had to have a physical address for our car to register it.
Yes, good question, actually. Very good question. I do have a postal address, so it's listed as a residential address for the purposes of driver's license and any other important documentation to be sent to. So I still have that because there's no postal facilities out at the marina there at all.
Right. So you're at a post office somewhere.
I do have a post box. A very dear friend has allowed me to utilise their address as a residential address for again the purposes of having mail and important documentation. But I also have a storage locker, a postal locker.
Yep.
So yes, I still have all of that. So yeah, I can still get things delivered and receive my mail, which is very important.
In these days, like handwritten mail has gone down, but those bills still seem to arrive.
They always seem to find you, don't they? Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and also I guess for things like voting and those sorts of things as well. So
correct.
I guess like living in a caravan, you don't change your address, so then you just move to a different.
Yeah. You've got one fixed, place that you anchor to, and then you just move to wherever you wish to, set up for that week, that month, that day, etc.
Yep.
But it always gives you an address to come back to.
Right.
A lot, I do say a lot of the grey nomads, their residential address is most likely one of their children or one of their kids, one of their relatives. So they've always got that home base address to come back to.
And what's the highlight that you have of living on the boat?
That's a good question, actually. That's a really good question. Things that I wouldn't normally be able to get to. I'll give you a couple of examples, actually. The fireworks, so the Australia Day fireworks in Bunbury here, for the last 2 years, they've actually been set off from the northern side of the marina there, where they've just put in the new breakwater. The fireworks came from there, so I literally had front row seats. to the fireworks, and I had my boy that weekend, and we just sat up on the top of the boat in the flybridge and we watched the fireworks. Like I say, we had front row seats to it.
Fantastic. No travel there, no travel home. It was
Exactly. Another highlight, and this was also very cool. Vat2'd have some concerts during the summer season, and they're literally only a few hundred metres away from where I'm actually parked on the jetty. The last two concerts, I can't remember the last one. It was a fairly sizable band, but we set up in the flybridge on the boat, up there, drinks, snacks, and we had a concert. It was very cool.
delivered to your door.
Pretty much. One of my neighbours actually had a really bright idea. He actually moved out of the marina, moved a little bit closer to where Vat2 was, put out his anchor, and he had a much closer seat than I did, and he just parked up there for the night. Come sunrise the next morning, the anchor comes up and he comes back and parks in his spot in the marina again. So it's very cool.
What's the community that you have at the marina?
Well, that's a very, very important part of it, actually, because we're all boat owners. There are a few of us that actually live on board, so we've all got, we have shared contact, and we keep an eye out for, everyone else's boats. All the boats around me, I've got people's contact details. We share tips. We share, if we need assistance, coming in and out in our boat. Not always easy to get a larger boat in and out without a deckhand. So we're always there to help. But like I say, the sharing of the knowledge is the important part, because we all bring something, so we all share that knowledge there. When I originally bought my boat, I was parked down in Port Geo, but I moved up to Bunbury for work reasons, so it was a lot closer and a lot easier to get to. And the neighbours I actually had at Port Geo have since moved up to Bunbury here, and they're about to set off on their epic adventure around the country. They're going to go north across the top end. They've spent the last 2.5 years setting up their sailboat, tidying it up, setting it all up for completely off-grid living. And so it's been a good catch-up because they're up here now. So those friendships, those connections that originally were made have continued. And that's the very important part of the community there.
You don't always meet people who are living in the same scenario, like being, I guess when you travel, like we drove across the country and we saw people, but we basically slept in the cars in car bays, so we were really not mixing with anybody. But you could see that there were people like across the Great Australian Bight, the people dotted throughout the dunes, that sort of thing. And it was really quite interesting that you can have those groupings, they form and they disappear quite quickly sometimes.
Yeah.
And that you still then build an extended community, don't you?
Well, that's it. It's that common ground. It's amazing how we all seem to find each other when we've got that common ground. And connections arise just because of that common ground. Yeah, absolutely. I've still got, some connections from down at Port Geo, because as with any machine, it requires service, maintenance, etc. And I've found, those connections, and maintaining that connection allows me to, continue to maintain my boat and service, or if emergencies arise, like earlier this year, I can then ensure that my boat is repaired and taken care of.
You talk about an emergency, I don't know if it's related, but we did have a big storm come through. Bureau of Meteorology said it was something like the highest energy weather system that had moved through since the records started or something. But they haven't been, those energy records haven't been going for like all that long, but that's still a pretty significant storm come through. What sort of impact does that have on where you live?
It's a very important thing to be aware of. Preparation is key. As I may have mentioned earlier, weather is very important. Keeping an eye on what the weather is going to be is very important, even from a day-to-day perspective. So where I'm currently parked at the Bunbury Marina, it's actually managed by Department of Transport. I think it's DPERD now. They've changed their name. But they're also keeping us informed of weather changes, upcoming weather, etc., and advising us to ensure that we are prepared for that weather. We did have that interesting storm a few months ago, and the worst damage that was recorded at the marina here was my next door neighbour actually lost the canvas and clears on the top of their flybridge. That was the worst damage we had because being prepared, all the boats were tied down. I saw boat owners coming down. I hadn't seen them in months, but they were there a couple of days before, checking all their mooring lines, checking their connections to their boat, and making sure everything was either tied down or stowed below deck. So preparation is very important, yes. Weather is one of the biggest variables in regards to living on a boat. So keeping an eye on the weather and making sure you're aware of what weather is coming, making sure you're prepared for it.
And what was the level of water and that sort of thing? How did that change?
Tidal changes. Oh my goodness. It's interesting how much the tide changes when storms come and go. Normally the water level in the marina doesn't go anywhere near above the jetty. While that storm was coming through in surges, we also had a high tide. The water was actually a good 1.5 feet above the jetty. So if you're on your boat, you are basically stuck there. However, as long as you're prepared, we're self-sufficient for power, we're self-sufficient for water. So we can be cut off for the day and still, having food, water and power in order to do the basic requirements. So very important. Plus, with that said, I've got, backup generator on board. So not only do I have battery power and an inverter, I've got a backup generator. So when the power went off, I still had what I needed.
You mentioned the jetties are a fixed jetty rather than a floating jetty. Can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, a fixed jetty, so fixed height. So it'll stay in one place and the tide will go up and down alongside it. So your boat can actually, be at different levels, in regards to the jetty, depending on the tides. What I have noticed is the variation between low tide and high tide in the marina here can be almost a metre. It's during some parts of the year, and then other times of the year it's maybe, less than 0.5 metre variation between high and low tide. But bring in a storm and that variation, is significantly increased, significantly amplified. So, but with floating jetties, that's a different story. They actually float on the water level. So unlike a fixed jetty where you've got to set your moorings so that there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of slack to allow for the tidal changes so that your boat either doesn't end up hanging from your mooring lines or being pulled under or being tipped over, as I did notice in the last storm. One boat was significantly on a bit of a lean because the mooring lines they didn't have enough slack or allowance in their mooring lines to accommodate it. But with floating jetties, what we can do is, we can tie our boats relatively close because the jetty goes up and down with the tide. So it allows you to tie your boat a little bit closer, keeps your boat a lot closer. Getting on and off is significantly easier with a floating jetty. And what a lot of people don't realise is a floating jetty will actually provide a buffer to that storm surge. So where you get a lot of waves and swell and so forth, a floating jetty will actually buffer against that. So keeping the water level calm and keeping your boat easy to get on and off is a lot better with a floating jetty. A lot more marinas now are implementing floating jetties. In the old days, everything was a fixed jetty, and that's the way it was. We have technology and improvements now to put in floating jetties. It is a little bit weird walking on a floating jetty though, because it moves. As soon as you walk it along it, you can feel the movement, whereas a fixed jetty, it's rock hard.
You're effectively walking on a boat.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, you're floating, yeah. So you're at the mercy of the water level and the tide, etc.
What else should we be thinking about as far as the experience of living on the boat?
Again, I'll come back to that word preparation. So skippering a boat, buying a boat, not just as simple as buying your boat. It's a vehicle that has to be registered. Insurance has to be applied because you need that insurance, because things will break. You know it. Every motor vehicle owner has insurance because they know they're going to have a bingle. But also having the ability or the certification to drive and operate that boat. So the skipper's ticket is very important. And that was one thing I didn't have right up until, just before the purchase of my boat. I didn't have a skipper's ticket. Never needed it. I spent a fair bit of time on boats. I did a lot of scuba diving at one stage. And the dive shop was quite happy for me to, take people scuba diving, and in trade I was, deckhand or, assist the dive masters, etc. on the day. So I never needed a skipper's ticket, because as long as somebody on the boat has that skipper's ticket, we're all good. But owning your own boat, very, very smart thing to do would be making sure you've got your recreational skipper's ticket. They're not difficult to get, but it teaches you the basics. And I did do some lessons with a couple of connections I made at Port Geo. So learning how to operate a boat. And there's a couple of different varieties. You see boats with an outboard, and then you'll see, some boats, they're generally the bigger ones, they'll have an inboard motor with a prop. Mine's actually a bit bigger. Mine actually has twin engines and twin props as well. So they all maneuver differently. So it's learning to be able to maneuver that particular boat in the water. And again, weather conditions can have a big effect on how the boat maneuvers in the water as well.
And then there's the option of sail as well, isn't there?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, my boat's a power boat. I did look at a sailboat at one stage. That was one of the first options that I had a look at. Sailboat, obviously you need more of a crew. 2 to 3 on the boat generally is ideal for, on a sailboat. And that's a different kettle of fish again. You're at the mercy of the wind. But most sailboats also have inboard engines, so they can travel under motor if weather conditions aren't suitable.
It's a big thing to choose the right sort of boat, I would imagine.
Correct. And you got to choose the boat that actually suits what your end purpose is. I did look at a sailboat, but it wasn't going to suit the purpose that I was going to use it for. Whereas a powerboat fits perfectly. I can go in and out from where I am, go out overnight, come back the next day, and that's pretty much how I use my boat. I don't go on long trips. The longest trip I've done so far is just between Bunbury and Busselton. But there are plans to go, Mandurah, Freo, etc. But they're not long journeys. They can be easily done on a powerboat, no problem.
Having your own power makes a big difference.
Well, that's it. And a sailboat, there's a lot more training and skill required in order to get the best out of it. And there's, to be honest, there's a lot more that can go wrong. With that said, with the right crew and the right preparation, it's, again, comes down to your purpose.
So if someone wanted to do what you've done and go and live on a boat, what would they need to think about before they even started to do that?
Great question. It's got to be a choice. I mean, my mindset at the time was simply to downsize, move away from, big house, big sheds, a big yard. Don't get me wrong, they were all great things, and they were all things that I wanted at that time when I did that. But I was looking for the option to downsize, go smaller and simplify. And I think I've achieved that. But if somebody else was thinking of doing it, it's a big step. It's got to be a well-researched choice on what you're going to do. I mean, I looked at boat, bus, or caravan and four-wheel drive. So I looked at 3 options to downsize and simplify. And the boat option just seemed to keep coming back up.
They are similar but different, aren't they, those 3 options?
They are indeed. Very, very similar and all very, very different. My thought process in looking at a bus was, it's great, but you've got to tow around another vehicle, because buses just don't fit in shopping centre car parks. And you can't really manoeuvre them terribly well through the middle of, the CBD or the busy part of town. So you've got to park away and get into town another way. Four-wheel drive and caravan, again, very similar. But at least you've got the option to detach vehicle, park the caravan somewhere secure, and then knowing you can come back to it. But with the boat, sure, I've got my van, so I can get around and do what I need to do. But my boat is my house, and it parks on the water, and it's actually opened up a few other opportunities for things to do, and a few other connections that I'd made in regards to. If I didn't have the boat, I may never have made those connections. So opportunities.
Well, that's a different perspective, the opening up different opportunities. How does that work?
Interesting. Back in the days when I used to do a lot of scuba diving, one of the boat skippers who used to assist the dive shop, I made friends with him way back then, and we stayed in contact, etc. And then when I needed to get my skipper's ticket, well, he was the first person I went to, because he's authorised to do the training and certification on recreational skipper's tickets. And then when I moved up to Bunbury, I then found out he actually owns and operates the dolphin discovery boats. So again, I've moved locations and I've stayed in contact with a particular connection. So I just keep an eye on his dolphin discovery boats over the weekends or overnight while they're parked there. At the moment, they're not being used a lot because weather. Again, it's not ideal conditions to go out looking for dolphins. But come the summer season, they'll be going out a lot more often, and I just keep an eye on it. If there's any troubles with him, I can then give him a call and say, hey, this is what's happened. I've tied it up, or I've done something to keep it from harm until he can come and resolve it.
A nice connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's also another Paul.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
We've been meeting Pauls all over the place. So in another circle, there's another 2 Pauls in that circle. So
I used to work with another Paul, also a good guy. He was a great dude. Still in contact with him, believe it or not. So I haven't spoken with him very often, but I worked with him over 20 years ago now.
all us Pauls, we're good guys.
Exactly.
Is there anything else about living in a boat that you think that people would want to know?
Maintenance. Yeah, there's another interesting can of worms. But with, like I say, with the right people around, I mean, same with your car. You work out what you can do in maintenance with your car. You do the maintenance you're capable of doing, and you hand it over to your mechanic when it's out of your scope and it's not your superpower. Same applies to a boat. The difference can be, though, some repairs require the boat to come out of the water, in which case it's then inaccessible. Well, it's just not accessible as my house while it's out of the water. So there's always got to be a plan B. But there's always having that plan ready to go. But maintenance like that, I mean, once a year, it's got to come out of the water. We clean the hull, anti-foul paint, and while it's out of the water, that gives us the opportunity to check other things that were inaccessible while it sits in the water. I did have an incident earlier this year where there was damage caused by, previous maintenance that hadn't been kept up from the previous owner. So it had to come out of the water again. And that was easily rectified. But again, learning experience. Prepared to learn? Absolutely. This will be a great journey. If you're not prepared to adapt and learn your environment, then it can be challenging. It can be very, very challenging.
You talked a lot about preparation. That's all about being ahead of the curve, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. Preventative maintenance is your best friend. If you wait for something to go wrong, and being a boat, it's sitting on water, it can go drastically wrong. So that incident I spoke of earlier required assistance from the Marine Rescue to get back to my pen so I could get a temporary repair and get it down to Port Geo to be lifted out of the water. So being prepared.
On land, it's a bit like having an accident in the car and you've got to actually make good.
Well, that's it. If your car breaks down, do you have a backup plan so you can still get to work, pick up the kids, go shopping, etc.? I've got to have that backup plan, because if the boat's out of action, where am I going to live? Where am I? How am I going to do what I normally do? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's my house, but I do use it as my office, but I tend to get distracted. I'll be working away and, oh, look, dolphins. Oh, going out and say hello. And then, I don't get any work done. So it can be a distraction.
You're a mobile worker as such, aren't you?
Pretty much, yeah. My office can be any cafe, any parking spot. I've done Microsoft Teams meetings with clients in my van. Sit in the back of the van, feet up, notebook, easy done.
So that's another consideration. If maybe if you fly in, fly out, that might cause a few issues if you're not around and something needs to be done, I guess.
That's good, because that's where that community comes back in. As I mentioned earlier, I've got contact with the boats around me. Not all of them live on board, so they might come down and see their boat every month or every week, or whatever their schedule is. So if something does go wrong, we've got that means to make contact and say, hey, this is going wrong. What would you like me to do?
Another great community connection. Yeah.
Exactly. Very, very important, actually. Very important.
Is there anything else you think we should talk about?
Actually, one of the biggest considerations I had when getting the boat was I have a now teenage boy. And I mean, our relationship has always been built on adventures, the things we do in the time that we spend together. So it was important for this decision to be made with him in mind and understanding the challenges that are associated with doing so. There was one major hurdle that I thought could have been an issue, but it turns out it wasn't. But the main part was I had basically full approval from, my teenage boy to, move out of Dad's house, and we're going to move into Dad's boat. So it's become a talking point with him and those in his world outside of Dad's house. They are quite actually surprised that he's taken to it so well. But, if we go for a ride in Dad's boat, he knows the rules. He's got to put his life jacket on, and he's got to sit up in the flybridge with Dad, normally with a big silly grin on his face. I've still yet to teach him to be my deckhand, but there are some challenges associated with using him as a deckhand, but he's definitely keen to live on Dad's boat. Absolutely no qualms there whatsoever.
Fantastic. He's very comfortable by the sound of that.
I've got this photo of him. Since the day he was born, I've had letters. So the letters of his name, and they were stuck on the side of his bed. He had this double-decker bed, and it's been the greatest thing for him. But of course, moving out of the house and moving into the boat, he couldn't take his bed. But I took the letters and we reset it on the cabin, just above his bed. And I've got this photo of him, his name on the bunk of his bed, him sitting there, big silly grin, just after we put the letters up. So yeah, he's definitely taken to living on Dad's boat. In fact, it's our current adventure. Isn't it, mister? Yes. I can say it was a big change. It was definitely a choice and something I had to look into and do some research before making that choice. Having an understanding of what you're getting into, like anything. I mean, my motivation for downsizing was very simple. It was very focused on me. It was to give me more time. Watching my boy grow up and trying to develop a business at the same time, something had to give, and I found it in downsizing and simplifying. Quite often we complicate our lives with too much stuff and go, oh yeah, but it'll be fine. No, I've now taken away my distractions.
Except the dolphins.
Oh, well, that's a different story. That's an acceptable distraction.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for being on Forest.chat. And all Forest.chat listeners wish you the best with your future endeavours.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the opportunity. Great to have a chat.
Great to have you on. You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode we've been talking with Paul Hashman about living on a boat. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. When you sign up for emails, you get advance notice of episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you do something interesting or that you think other people may find interesting, book an interview at forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a small business, book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you with our next guest. Until then, enjoy making it happen.